Former New York Fed President Bill Dudley does not think the Fed should play along with President Trump's demands. In a Bloomberg op-ed, Dudley said the Federal Reserve needs to stay above the political fray to maintain its independence. Joining us now is Yahoo Finance's Brian Cheung. Very controversial op-ed by what is quite a powerful position that he held at the New York Fed.
Yeah, I mean, this is about as spicy as you can get from the Federal Reserve. But Bill Dudley, the former New York Fed president, and for those that aren't aware, he was a permanent voting member of the FOMC because among the 12 federal districts, there are 12 Federal Reserve Bank presidents. It's the New York Fed president that's the only one that has a permanent voting role on the FOMC. He was there for a number of years, only stepped down recently, and John Williams is now the New York Fed president. But Bill Dudley coming out in this Bloomberg opinion piece and saying he supports the Fed's desire to want to be independent, but that it's basically become untenable to try to steer policy because there's a worry, a real concern that, on his end at least, that maybe easing policy would just allow President Trump to continue to ratchet up the trade war. So he worries that if the Fed were to continue to cut rates, it already did the first in July, that this would give President Trump the room to kind of escalate the tensions that we've already seen with China.
And what people are perhaps even finding more controversial about his comments is not just that the Fed should be independent, but perhaps should actively work against the president, because he suggests that President Trump's policies are not in the economic best interests of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it was the last sentence in his op-ed, quote, "If the goal of monetary policy is to achieve the best long-term economic outcome, then Fed officials should consider how their decisions will affect the political outcome in 2020, end quote. I mean, a pretty dangerous statement from a pretty big former Fed official there, saying the Fed should prioritize the election next year in setting its policy. Its dual mandate has nothing to do with what the political outcome is, especially in the short term of 2020. It's maximum employment and stable prices. There's nothing in there that says they should be paying mine, and they are an independent institution. They do not report to Trump. So pretty remarkable to hear a Fed official say that.
Yeah, Paul, I have a feeling Paul has something to say about this. I'm sorry.
Well, so first of all, I mean, talk about the race to the bottom of poor behavior. Dudley is doing what my guess is all of them behind closed doors may be doing, but have not done publicly. He's getting down into the weeds, rolling up his sleeves and going to fight with essentially Trump or the administration. As you said, I can't find anywhere in the dual mandate where it says the Fed should worry about politics or anything else besides maximum employment and price stability. It doesn't say worry about China. It doesn't say worry about Europe about to collapse. It says it's supposed to worry about maximum employment and price stability, which clearly we have today.
But you can't divorce those elements from China and from what other central banks are doing.
That's not in their mandate. I mean, I've never seen, it seems like in the last, 10 years, everyone's playing outside of their sandbox and somebody else's, and their own sandbox is being flooded. And why can't people stay in their own lane? Let's use more metaphors. But Dudley has no business writing this, really. If he truly is a company man, mind your own business, head down. The Fed should worry about what the Fed is always worried about. They can't worry about what Trump may or may not do.
Well, but the trade war has an effect on price stability, does it not?
But it has done nothing yet, right?
I will take Bill Dudley's. I'm going to take Bill Dudley's side on this. He is not a Fed policymaker at the moment. He's a former Fed policymaker. And I think what he's doing is sticking up for the Fed. I think he's doing what the Fed cannot do for itself. It is a fairly extraordinary suggestion, but these are extraordinary attacks by the president on the central bank. And I think he's just one authoritative voice saying, back off, man.
So here's the challenge, is that the Federal Reserve says that it's independent, that it pays no mind to what is happening in the White House when it makes its decisions, because it needs to operate in that vacuum to make sure that the decisions that it makes to steer the economy are not being jeopardized. But the problem is, how can you do that when there are material impacts of this tariff war on consumer confidence? Well, not necessarily consumer confidence yet, but business fixed investment. We've seen that companies are holding back from it. So we've already seen the impacts of this, even though the threat of the tariffs hasn't been fully implemented yet, as it's recently been threatened.
But to be fair in closing, we heard the same thing from CEOs in 8 years under Obama. They weren't spending because of the quote-unquote uncertainty around taxes. They can always find an excuse. Things will always impact it. Fed's got to put their head down, do it. Even though the Fed's usually wrong, they need to do what they think is best for the economy, not worry about Donald Trump or anything.
So should they cut in September?
Should they cut? The Fed follows the market. The market says you need to cut rates.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, just quickly, if I could just say, I mean, the point is that the Federal Reserve has a difference between the way that they talk behind closed doors and the way that they talk publicly.
Right.
They're not paying attention to what the president's doing or what the president is saying. It's just when they publicly face, they can't say that. moving on tweets from the president.
But Dudley can, I guess.
Exactly.
So, all right. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for that spicy conversation.